Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone with all those pronouns which are beyond ladies and gentlemen, because we're very inclusive here. Because this world is changing. There were ladies, there were gentlemen. Now we got like a lot of mixed up stuff. Like all over the place kind of people. Welcome all of you. Thank you for listening. Okay. We are today going to talk about one of my favorite topics. We are going to talk about the changing world order. This is part 2 because I already did the talk last year or the year before that, whenever the Ray Dalio video released. And we did a synopsis of how we think the world order is going to change. And now a lot has changed. The world order has changed in a significant way. We're at a place now where things are getting crazy and kooky, but it's given us a lot more clarity, a lot more perspective. A lot of things have happened that have clarified what the process of that changing world order is going to look like. So let's just do some history like we always go. Let's zoom out 50,000 meters / 100,000 feet view. In order for us to understand what the changing world order is, we have to understand what was the old world order. That sounds like a conspiracy sim, that there's some kind of a world order. You conspiracy theorists with your tinfoil hats are always talking about world orders. Well, there is a world order. It's just the way the world works. And one of the legends of finance is going to explain to you how world orders change. The old world order was a world order created from 1945, and it was dependent on the US dollar. Okay, let's back up through history. World War II happens. Before World War II, the British pound was a global reserve currency. The sun never set on the British Empire at that point. After World War II, the sun did start to set on the British Empire, weirdly enough. When Britain was destroyed and the whole world order, Britain's hegemony or power was destroyed in 1945, the US came along and a bunch of bankers got together. And they said, how about we do this? We tie the value of every currency in the world to the US dollar, because the US is the strongest economy at the time, and the US had the most amount of gold. We tie the value of every currency in the world to the US dollar, and then we tie the value of the US dollar to gold. So every currency will be backed by gold. It was called the Bretton Woods system. Okay? That system ran beautifully for a long period of time. So from 1945 until 1970, it created insane amounts of prosperity in the US and in the West. Specific countries that the US was aligned with, like Japan and Germany and UK and many of those European countries, what we call today the developed world, or the first world if you are a rude person. I'm just kidding. If you call it the first world, it's the first world, because they're first in that situation. That world benefited from the dollar being tied to gold, and every currency being tied to the dollar. In 1970, though, something happened. The US was printing too much money, too much paper money, compared to how much gold they had. And everybody figured it out. They went, well, I think the US is tricking us. They said it's tied to gold. If it's really tied to gold, I want my gold, good sir. And they asked the US for the gold. The French asked, many countries asked for the gold back that the US was holding supposedly, and they wanted to give the dollars back for the gold. And the US pulled an old classic move and went, sorry. No, they didn't even say sorry. They went, no, we are not going to give you the gold. As a matter of fact, I have decreed that we're not going to give you the gold. And now your currency is tied to the US dollar. He said, they'll play it in the video, but he was like, the currency of a country depends on the economy of a country, and we shall protect the currency against the speculators. Basically what they said is, we are defaulting on our debts. We're not going to pay back our debts. We're defaulting, and you're going to keep your currency tied to the US dollar. Nobody could argue that, so then they just continued. And then in the 1970s, we had the oil embargo from the Middle East. So then the US and Saudi Arabia made a deal. They said, okay, Saudi Arabia, you can have your oil fields as long as you can only sell your oil in dollars. And they made it so that everybody in the world could only buy oil in dollars, which meant if you want oil, you need to buy dollars, which meant that the dollar was tied to oil. It was backed by oil. And that system ran somewhat beautifully for a long period of time. But as soon as the US broke the tie of the dollar from gold, in 1971, the US went on a printing spree, because now it's not tied to anything. We can just print as much money as we like and give it to ourselves, and we can use that to buy oil and wealth and just generate infinite amounts of debt. That's why in 1970, a house cost 25,000 US dollars, and a car, brand new car, used to cost $3,000. And we're sitting here today, and that same house costs like $1 million. And that same car costs $60,000, $70,000, getting more and more expensive. So they basically inflated the US money supply because they could, because they have the guns. Along the way, as that's working, some people tried to not sell oil in gold. Their names were Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, and what was it? The guy that was running Venezuela. And if you remember, Saddam apparently had weapons of mass destruction that had to be taken down. Gaddafi apparently was a bad guy. He was a bad guy, but that he had to be taken out and he was murdered. And the guy in Venezuela, the whole country was collapsed as a repercussion from the US to teach people a lesson that you never mess with the power of the US dollars. Now, that's been the world order. The value of the dollar tied to oil. Guns make sure that you never buy oil in anything other than the dollar. Recently, because countries and leaders know how the historical game plays out, as they've been seeing the demise of the US empire, the US run global world order, countries came together. So initially, Brazil, Russia, India, and China came together. They're the 4 fastest growing economies at the time. They came together and they said, let's band together and create our own currency. Okay? And as soon as they announced that, people got worried. And the US dollar started to collapse, right? Because they were like, why do we have to buy dollars? Why do we have to be dependent on a country that is printing money out of existence? Why don't we just create our own currency? Then South Africa joined them. Now recently, Saudi Arabia is asking to join them. Now, the people who were keeping the US dollar tied to oil have determined that they no longer want to be aligned with the US, and they've decided to align with Russia, India, China, Brazil, and other countries are going to join as well. So that is the shift where the US is not going to go blow up China, which they're going to do it now, but even then, you can't blow up India, Russia, China, Brazil. Like, these are massive, massive countries, and they are the fastest growing economies. That's just not how it works at this point. And the US has overextended themselves to a point where they simply can't even afford it to go to war with all those countries. So then what the BRICS, these countries, they're called BRICS, what they did is they basically started throwing bricks at the US. And one of the bricks that they threw was they created a new development bank. So the World Bank is like the US's, it's based in the US, but it's the one world government's kind of world bank that uses loans and stuff to rural countries. These guys created New Development Bank, which is another bank that gives loans to countries and takes over economically. Now, what we're seeing in this process, we're seeing the fracturing of the old world order, okay? The old world order was everything's based on the US, based on the dollar. The new world order is the people who are aligned with the US, Canada, Australia, UK, US obviously, Mexico, all of those countries are going to keep using the dollar and the dollar system. The other side is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, many other countries. They're going to create their own currency that's going to be a reserve currency for them, and they're going to break away from the financial system. Now, in order for The new world order, which is not China, it's not Russia, it's actually the one world order, which has now been said multiple times openly. That world order needs to divide and conquer between the existing world order. So they've now divided the world into these fractured factions, and they are going to rule over them by actually putting a central neutral bridge reserve currency, in my humble opinion, XRP, alongside with XLM and a few other currencies that are going to be in this global transactional system. So basically you have, you know, the central bank digital currencies, the digital dollars, US dollars, digital pound works with the digital dollar, so on and so forth, digital yuan, digital ruble, digital Indian rupee, digital Brazilian real, all of those are going to be digital. In order for them to transact with each other, they will go through, you know, you'll turn your Indian rupee into XRP, and the XRP will then turn into US dollars. So you'll still be able to transact, but through an intermediary, which is a non-jurisdictional intermediary, right? That's why we've been saying this is the way the world's going, and now it's all proving out to be true, okay? So between now and 2025, the way this system is going to go, we're going to see the asset confiscations, which we're going to go through in detail. Not just me, the great Ray Dalio is going to explain this, who is a legend of financial understanding. Between now and 2025, we're going to have asset confiscations, bank balances, confiscation, and transition to this new digital system, which has digital IDs, digital currencies, digital assets, digital places, digital. Did I say digital? It's going to be digital. Okay. All of those things are falling into place. The fracturing is happening. The currencies are collapsing. 69 countries ready to collapse this year. 107 are on the docket. Probably more will go down. Countries have started to just dump US dollars because they realize, hey, if you can take Russia's money, you can take all of our money. So countries have started to dump US dollars. Literally, Saudi Arabia had, you know, Biden was like, Saudi Arabia, you're our friend. Make sure you sell us cheap oil. Saudi Arabia's like, yeah, sounds good, no problem. They're like, no, I'm serious. Make sure you sell us cheap oil. They're like, yeah, we heard you. Get out of here. So he actually goes and flies down to meet them. And, you know, MBS, the guy who's a legend, he literally walks out and fist bumps Biden and walks him inside. You know, classic power move. Amazing. Then Xi Jinping from China comes. He is in a limo. They put royal guards on horses on either side with proper, you know, Middle Eastern garb, and they rode him in like a king to the front. If that doesn't tell you about where the allegiances lie, and now they've just outright said, hey, US, don't fuck with us. We're not people to be fucked with. Okay, so now let's go through this video, and I'll pause it and be annoying from time to time and explain how this kind of analysis of the world order changing and the framework that Ray Dalio lays out, how this new world order fits in, what are the new systems that are being created. Now, some of the names that are part of this framework of the new world order, you may have heard some of these. IMF, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, BlackRock, Blackstone, State Street. You know, all of these are basically jurisdictionless, either corporations or associations or organizations, or, you know, they're systems which are created by a global set of people which do not fall under one jurisdiction. They have, you know, now aligned themselves with currencies, which are cryptocurrencies, actually digital assets, which also do not have a jurisdiction. Bitcoin does not have a jurisdiction. All these digital assets we're talking about, they're jurisdictionless, and the institutions that are running them are jurisdictionless, and the institutions that are in power today are jurisdictionless, right? That's why they sit above everybody else. That's why when they say, shut down the world shuts down. When they say, open the world opens up, okay? So nothing new there, but let's listen to Ray Dalio. I really love this talk. Sometimes when I'm bored, I just go and watch this talk for funsies because, you know, I'm a nerd. But he's a nerd too. Nerds unite, okay?
The changing world order. The times ahead will be radically different from those that we've experienced in our lifetimes, though similar to many times before. How do I know that? Because they always have been. Over my roughly 50 years of global macroeconomic investing, I've learned the hard way that the most important events that surprised me did so because they never happened in my lifetime. These painful surprises led me to study the last 500 years of history for similar situations, where I saw that they had indeed happened many times before, with the ups and the downs of the Dutch, British, and U.S. empires. And every time they did, it was a sign of the changing world order. This study taught me valuable lessons that I'm going to pass along to you here in a distilled form. You can find the comprehensive version in my book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. Let me begin with a story that brought me to this point, about how I learned to anticipate the future by studying the past. In 1971, when I was a young clerk on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the United States ran out of money and defaulted on its debts. That's
Mr. Ray Dalio, did you just say that the U.S. ran out of money and defaulted on its debts? I did not know this. I did not know that happened in 1971. I thought the U.S. has been the legendary empire forever. As a matter of fact, children, the U.S. did this in 1931 as well. Okay? In 1929, the Great Collapse happened, the start of the Great Depression. And in 1931, 2 years later, the U.S. defaulted on its debt and basically they effectively made it illegal to own gold and took control of all the gold. And they broke their promise to pay back the gold that they were going to pay back. And the people who'd taken their gold into banks, the bank said, sorry, bank holiday, we're taking all your gold. Our promise is gone. We have defaulted on our debts. 1929, the collapse happens. 1931, they default on their debts. 1969, the faith in the U.S. dollar the U.S. dollar's ability to maintain its tie to gold breaks down. 2 years later, in 1971, the U.S. defaulted on its debts and ran away with everybody's money. Okay? This year, 2023, the faith in the U.S. dollar has gone away again, and U.S. bonds have gone away again. And a bond is a promise to pay back the money to countries and people and banks. I think within the next 2 years, history doesn't repeat, but it wraps real good. It has good flow, you know? So I think within the next 2 years, they're going to default on their debts again soon. Okay? Might be quicker than that.
That's right. The U.S. ran out of money. How? Well, back then, gold was the money used in transactions between countries. Paper money, like the dollar, was like checks in a checkbook in that it had no value other than it could be exchanged for gold, which was the real money. At the time, the United States was spending a lot more money than it was earning by writing a lot more of these paper money checks than it had gold in the bank to exchange for them. As people turned these checks into the bank for gold money, the amount of gold in the U.S. started to dwindle. It soon became obvious that the U.S. couldn't keep its promises for all the existing paper money, so people holding dollars rushed to exchange them before the gold ran out. Recognizing that the U.S. was going to run out of real money, On Sunday evening, August 15th, President Nixon went on television to tell the world that the U.S. was breaking its promise to let people exchange their dollars for gold.
Okay. So last time, the people were holding dollars, which were like checks that represent how much gold the government owes you. And the government said, I'm not going to pay you the gold. And the banks kept it. This time around, people are holding digital dollars, some number on a screen, which says, the bank owes me this much cash, let's say, which is what everybody wants and is tied to that. And when you go to the bank and you say, hey, my digital dollar, I want to convert it into cash and give it to me, they're going to say, sorry, we don't have enough, right? Same way the gold ran out, the money in the bank is already run out. It's gone. Poof, vamoose. The banks will break their promise to pay you back. China, this has already happened. The Chinese rushed to the banks and said, give us our money. And the bank said, you're Chinese. Goodbye, sir. Russia. Russian banks have done this overseas, and in Russia this is happening. Lebanon. Goodbye. Sri Lanka. Sorry, you can't get your money out. 1,000 countries. Algeria, our friends from Algeria, they literally can't get their money out. Okay? They can't even get it out of the country. Even if they have money, they can't get it out of the country. El Salvador is on the way. Everybody's happy about Bitcoin. Sorry, El Salvador is going the way of the dodo. Argentina, Egypt, 69 other countries are all at the point where when the people go to the bank and try to get the money, it's either already happened that they're not giving them the money, or soon it's going to happen. Bank of America is not letting people pull their money out right now as we speak. If you have a Bank of America account, please go to them and say, I want my $1 million in my other bank account, or I want to move it somewhere else, or send it overseas or whatever. Let me know how that goes. Many banks from across the world have all said, sorry, your digital numbers on the screen, the promise that we would pay you back that in money is not going to happen. Oopsies.
Of course he didn't say it that way. He said it more diplomatically, without making it clear that the United States was defaulting.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
I watched in awe, realizing that money as we understood it was ending. What a crisis! I expected the stock market to plunge the next day, so I got on the exchange floor early to prepare. When the opening bell rang, pandemonium broke out, but not the kind I expected. The market was up, way up, and went on to rise nearly 25%. That surprised me, because I never experienced a currency devaluation before. When I dug into history, I discovered that the exact same thing happened in 1933 and had the exact same effect. Then, paper dollars were also linked to gold, which the U.S. was running out of because it was spending more paper money checks than it had gold to exchange for them. And President Roosevelt announced on the radio that he would break the country's promise to exchange dollars for gold.
It was then that I issued the proclamation providing for the national bank holiday. And this was the first step in the government's reconstruction of our financial and economic fabric.
In the government's restructuring of our financial and economic fabric. So think about that. The government defaulted on its debts. They then went and broke the promise of paying people back, and then printed a bunch of money and dumped it into the system because they could at that point. And then what did the markets do? They ran off on a massive pump. Okay? This time around, They're going to say, we're not going to give you cash back. Sorry, it's gone. Bank bail-ins, we've taken it. If you don't know what a bank bail-in is by now, you haven't watched enough of these talks, but also please Google it, learn about it yourself. That's where they take all of the money from your bank. And you did sign on a dotted line saying, yes, please, I'm happy with that. Then they're going to create digital dollars. They're going to print central bank digital currencies and create digital dollars. Now, if you're somebody who's like, yeah, but I will hold my money in stocks. So, when this happens, I can maybe sell the money and pull it out. You won't be able to pull it out. Initially, things may crash with whatever event this is that causes this, massive collapse and the breakdown of the banking system. After that, stocks, bonds, gold, commodities, crypto, all of them will pump because all that printed money will rush into these assets. Now, digital assets are going to pump the most because they're the newest kid on the block. They're the newest asset class that exists. They're so nascent and they're going to be developed over the next few years, and they're going to take over the entire world by the next 8 years. By 15 years from now, every single thing will run on them without fail. So that's what we're prepping for, right? That's why we're taking our wealth and putting it into assets. People are trying to get rich now. No, wait, and you'll get ultra wealthy. Again, no promises, not financial advice, blah, blah, blah. But the amount of money you make when this process happens is ridiculous because the numbers just get crazy, right?
The second step last Thursday was the legislation promptly and patriotically passed by the Congress, confirming my proclamation and broadening my powers so that it became possible, in view of the requirement of time, to extend the holiday and lift the ban of that holiday gradually in the days to come. This law also gave authority to develop a program of rehabilitation.
In both cases, breaking the link to gold allowed the U.S. to continue spending more than it earned, simply by printing more paper dollars. Since there was an increase in the number of dollars without an increase in the country's wealth, the value of each dollar fell. As these new dollars entered the market, without a corresponding increase in productivity, they went to buy lots of stocks, gold, and commodities, and hence caused their prices to rise. As I studied more history, I saw that the exact same thing happened many, many times before.
It just happened in 2020, right? The world shut down. Everything was supposed to collapse, apparently. The government's freaked out, printed a bunch of money, dumped it into the markets. And then what happened? Crypto went on a run. Stocks went on a run. Tesla became a $1 trillion company. Blah, blah, blah. All this money rushes into assets and inflates them like crazy. And now that they're printing less money or reducing the money supply, basically, now the assets are collapsing. And then what are they going to do next? Oops, sorry, we broke everything. Here's a big excuse. We're printing money. Assets go for a run again. Okay, it's happened in history for hundreds and thousands of years, but it's playing out in front of us on a very short-term basis.
I saw that since the beginning of time, when governments spent much more than they took in taxes, and conditions got bad, they ran out of money and they needed more. So they printed more, a lot more, which made its value fall and made the prices of most everything, including stocks, gold, and commodities, rise. That's when I first learned the principle that when central banks print a lot of money to relieve a crisis, buy stocks, gold, and commodities, because
when central banks, this is a rule, write this one down. When central banks print a lot of money, buy stocks, gold, commodities, and crypto. That's why we're taking gold in a mine, which is a commodity, turning it into a stock as a registered security, and turning it into a crypto. So we can triple dip. So we can get more juice out of it, right? Double, triple, quadruple dip. But buy stocks, gold, commodities, real estate, digital assets, good businesses. All those are real assets, okay? When central banks print money. That's why, as soon as the central banks start printing money, we start diving into the markets. Until then, Have patience, young one. These things take time to play out. Could be a year, could be 2 years, who knows? That's a very short period of time.
The value of paper money will fall. This printing of money is also what happened in 2008 to relieve the mortgage-driven debt crisis, and in 2020 to relieve the pandemic-driven economic crisis, and it almost certainly will happen in the future. So I suggest that you keep this principle in mind. These experiences gave me another principle, which is to understand what is coming at you, you need to understand what happened before you. That principle led me to study how the Roaring '20s bubble turned into the 1930s depression, which gave me the lessons that allowed me to anticipate and profit from the 2007 bubble turning into the 2008 bust. All these experiences led me to develop an almost instinctual urge to look to the past for similar situations to learn how to handle the future well. Changing orders. Over the last few years, 3 big things that hadn't happened in my lifetime prompted me to do this study. First, countries didn't have enough money to pay their debts, even after lowering interest rates to 0, so their central banks began printing lots of money to do so. Second, big internal conflicts emerged due to growing gaps in wealth and values. This showed up in political populism and polarization between the left, who want to redistribute wealth, and the right, who want to defend those holding the wealth.
Is a cardinal function of the changing world order. That when a system runs for as long as it runs, it gets to a certain point where the people who know the system and control the system and run the system become ultra wealthy. Wealthy beyond most people's imaginations. And then there's a vast subset of society that becomes poor or subservient or, gets put into a life that they don't like. So, because the people who are ultra wealthy control the media, control the social media nowadays, they control the narrative, they control everything because they have all the money. It naturally lends itself to them creating divisions between people. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Do you like Trump? Do you not like Trump? Did you get stabbed with a sharp needle? Did you not get stabbed with a sharp needle? Are you black? Are you white? Are you Asian? Are you, do you know my pronoun? Make sure you say my pronoun right. Are you a man? Are you a woman? Everybody starts to fight everybody. And it seems like it's just, a natural function of society, and that, we are trying, there's always a good reason for it. Seems like a good reason for it, but it's actually a function of the fracturing of society. We just talked about, the New World Order fracturing countries. Then they fracture the people within the countries into factions. Then they fracture society into different factions. Then, everybody just gets fractured. So we're just busy fighting each other, over stupid shit, compared to, actually creating something better in the system itself. So this is a natural function, and that's why you're seeing all of this stuff happening. The China and the US don't like each other. Russia and the people don't like each other. Everybody's fighting everybody at this point.
And third, increasing external conflict between a rising great power and the leading great power, as is now happening with China and the United States. So I looked back. I saw that all these had happened together before, many times, and nearly always led to changing domestic and world orders.
China has now started explaining to its citizens that rice bran is food. The stuff on the outside of rice husks, some people call them, is food, because they're that concerned about famines happening in their country. And they know that's one of the ways that the West will attack them, because they're such a big country, they can't supply food for themselves forever, and supply chains are breaking down. And, ships that bring in the food are insured by companies in the UK so that they can shut things down. And there's a whole control mechanism that is underlying all this stuff. But China is that concerned, and they're running military exercises. They're squashing protests that are happening. They're literally imprisoning people who are protesting against all the current regime and all this stuff. And then the beef between the US and China has been going on for a long period of time, and all of that is lending itself or leading towards a changing world order. And it usually takes about 15 years for that process to play out properly. We've already seen it going on for about 5 years, so we probably have another 10 years left in this whole game. So the next 10 years is going to be very interesting 10 years. Now, the big shift that's happening this time that's different from the one that happened before. Before, these shifts would happen between countries, right? It's like, okay, UK runs stuff, Britain runs stuff. Okay, the shift happens to the US, now US runs stuff. Now we have one big connected world. And instead of countries running stuff, it's technology that's going to be running stuff. Okay, it's beyond countries. The whole globe will be run under one cohesive control mechanism through technologies. That's why it's so important to understand these technologies.
The last time this sequence happened was from 1930 to 1945. What exactly is an order, you might ask? It's a governing system for people dealing...
Right? I go to Mickey D's. I would like to order something. No? Sorry. Oops. Sorry, what were you saying?
Is an order, you might ask. It's a governing system for people dealing with each other. There are internal orders for governing within countries, typically laid out in constitutions. And there is a world order for governing between countries, typically laid out in treaties. Internal orders change at different times than world orders, though whether within or between countries, these orders typically change after wars.
An order is a set of rules, I guess, of how people interact with each other. They exist between countries and they exist within countries. Okay? And they typically change after wars. God damn it. Nobody wants to hear that part. But yeah, we don't like change. If I tell you, yeah, change to crypto, you're like, nah, I'm chills. I like my bank. It's a bank. I'm a banker. I call a banker. I'm like, no, trust me. Get your money out of the bank, blah, 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 blah. No, it's been like that. My dad told me that's a safe place to keep it. Grandpa told me that's a safe place to keep it. I'm good. Then we go, guess what? World War III just happened. You're like, I'm going to take my money out of the banks and I'm going to run to the new system. Okay. See, that's why people don't move. Especially when you're wealthy and you get wealthy. And I mean, if you're listening to this, you are wealthy. Okay. If you make more than $100,000 in US per year, you are in the 1% of the entire world. 99% of people in the world don't make as much as you. You've escaped escape velocity. When you get to that level, or even like $50,000 in most countries, you become lazy. I don't want to work. I just want to chill. You ask people what do they want? I want to travel. I want to have experiences. I want to sip champagne and different beaches. Have you been to Thailand? Have you been to Cambodia? We went to Thailand and then we went to Cambodia and then we went to, all over the place. That's what I like to do. I don't want to change. Okay, I'll change now. It's not nice.
Civil wars within countries, international wars between countries. They happen when revolutionary new forces defeat weak old orders. For example, the U.S. internal order was laid out in the Constitution in 1789 after the American Revolution, and it is still operating today, even after the American Civil War.
A massive war will happen, which is interesting because the World Health Organization just issued recommendations to stockpile medications for nuclear war. It's probably nothing. Just a coincidence. Conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory. But according to my approximation, an economic war, economic war already going, biological war, psychological war, okay? It's war of the minds, war through apps on our children's psyche, already underway. Cyber war is starting now. All of these, the airlines being shut down. All of a sudden, Bank of America has a bunch of money being taken out of people's accounts, which they're like, oopsies, my bad. We didn't even realize that was happening. There's, Ukraine had such giant cyber attacks. Cyber war is well underway. They just haven't. I mean, literally, what was that? I forgot the name, but there's a company that thousands and thousands of companies were using as a security provider, and they got cyber attacked, which means all of those companies got cyber attacked, which means all of their data got stolen. Okay, and we were just like, nah, it's probably nothing. Cyber war, hot war. It's happening in Ukraine. It's happening in Syria. It's happening in so many parts of the world. It's coming to a theater near you. And then we have a Cold War happening right now, which is, we have a technology war happening where the US now has blocked China from getting the machines that print the chips that allows China to create AI. Well, then that's another war, right? AI war. We're gonna have AIs that are gonna attack each other. We got robot war coming. We're just making up. At this point, we're just making up new wars. All kinds of new wars. Many of them are already happening. Many of them will happen, and that is the shift from this old system to the new system.
Russia got rid of its old order and established a new one with the Russian Revolution in 1917, which ended in 1991 with a relatively bloodless revolution. China began its current internal order in 1949 when the Chinese Communist Party won the Civil War. You get the idea. The current world order, commonly called the American World Order, formed after the Allied victory in World War II, when the U.S. emerged as the dominant world power. It was set out in agreements and treaties for how global governance and monetary systems work. In 1944, the New World Monetary System was laid out in the Bretton Woods Agreement and established the dollar as the world's leading reserve.
This agreement was written by a bunch of bankers. Just a pro tip.
A reserve currency is a currency that is commonly accepted around the world, and having one is a key factor in a country becoming the richest and most powerful empire. With a new dominant power and monetary system established, a new world order begins. These changes take place in a timeless and universal cycle that I call the Big...
So reserve currency is one of the key defining factors of a world order. Okay? We just discussed that people are not going to use the US dollar, especially when it's digital, because that allows the US to access everybody's financial data, which is like one of the most important national secrets on the planet. They're not going to use the digital yuan for the exact same reason. They're not going to use the Indian rupee because, they're not going to. So we are going to have, in the currency space, we're going to have different kind of reserve currencies that different factions use. The American friends will use the American reserve currency. The BRICS system will use bricks. They'll just take physical bricks and send them to each other. I'm not going to stop with the BRICS jokes. It's funny. They're called bricks. South America wants to make their own, Middle East wants to make their own, blah, blah, blah. Everybody kind of makes up their own currencies and transacts in them, and they don't have to get dollars to do that. But in between all of that is a jurisdictionless set of currencies. You may have heard them. They are called crypto currencies, right? They're jurisdictionless. They don't come from any country. It's not like they will be the only global reserve currency. The idea of a single global reserve currency is going to go away. We're going to have reserve assets that sit in the middle, and things like XRP are built to carry the weight of hundreds of trillions of US dollars worth of assets on them. So we're going to have reserve assets that sit in the middle. So when you inflate a currency, that asset's value just inflates alongside it, right? Whoever's in the currency loses all their money because they're inflating it away. Whoever's in the assets just makes a bunch of money because they're just, where's the money going? If they're printing money, they're buying assets with it. The people with the assets get all the money. So that's why we're in digital assets. Okay, you need to be on the asset side of the wall, not on the currency side of the wall. Like 40% of all the money, all the dollars that have existed ever were printed in the last 2 years. So that means if you had just held on to dollars, you lost 40% of your purchasing power, which is probably something you're noticing right now. Are you in Europe? Have you noticed your energy bills going up? Are you anywhere in the world? Have you noticed your food bills going up? Have you noticed houses getting more expensive? Have you noticed cost of living going up? I mean, here, it's ridiculous. We're in Bali, and it's literally like, now they just basically put up an ad saying, a kidney per month, please, is like the price. They've just went to organ prices. But all of that happening is the currencies being inflated and people losing purchasing power and the asset holders getting all of that money.
I'll start with a quick overview, then give you a more complete version, and then direct you to my book if you want more. As I studied the 10 most powerful empires over the last 500 years and the last 3 reserve currencies, it took me through the rise and decline of the Dutch Empire and the guilder, the British Empire and the pound, the rise and early decline in the United States Empire and the dollar, and the decline and rise of the Chinese Empire and its currencies, as well as the rise and decline of the Spanish, German, French, Indian, Japanese, Russian, and Ottoman empires, along with their significant conflicts, as measured in this chart. To understand China's patterns better, I also studied the rise and fall of Chinese dynasties and their monies back to the year 600. Because looking at all these measures at once can be confusing, I'll focus on the 4 most important ones: the Dutch, British, US, and Chinese. You'll quickly notice the pattern. Now let's simplify the form a bit. As you can see, they transpired in overlapping cycles that lasted about 250 years.
Started in 1776. 250 years later is 2026. Nah, it's probably nothing.
With 10 to 20 year transition periods between them. Typically, these transitions
To happen. Okay? We have now had the US's collapse effectively happening since 2008. 10 years later is 2028. Well, those timelines lining up is also probably just a coincidence.
transitions have been periods of great conflict because leading powers don't decline without a fight. So how am I measuring an empire's power? In this study, I used 8 metrics. Each country's measure of total power is derived by averaging them together. They are education, inventiveness and technology development, competitiveness in global markets, economic output, share of world trade, military strength, the power of their financial center for capital markets, and the strength of their currency as a reserve currency. Because these powers are measurable, we can see how strong each country is now, was in the past, and whether they're rising or declining. By examining the sequences from many countries, we can see how a typical cycle transpires. And because the wiggles can be confusing, we can simplify it a bit to focus on the pattern of cause-effect relationships that drive the rise and decline of a typical empire. As you can see, better education typically leads to increased innovation and technology development.
Education leads to increased innovation and technology development. Is the US education doing well? Trust me, I went to American school. It's hilariously dumb. I mean, I went back to India for like 4 months to study there for a bit. In India, they were making us do trigonometry in our heads. In the US at the same time, they were teaching us algebra. So no, the education is shit. Now let's compare the New World Order. You know, if this is where I disagree with Ray Dalio's his analysis, because he's still just thinking, oh, this will just be a new country that rises up and the same stuff will happen again. I'm sorry, I see things a little differently. I'm sorry, not sorry. Let's look at education from the one world government. The one world government, let's talk about the World Economic Forum, has educated the world on globalism for 30 years and have taught us technology, which is jurisdictionless, for the last 30 years, through and through. I mean, now they're bragging about how most of a large amount of the world's leaders were youth leaders with the World Economic Forum. So they've been educating the leaders of the world on how to run the world. They've been creating foundations. They've been creating business opportunities. They've been building systems. I mean, for the last, 20 years, they've been educating our kids on how to talk, how to act, what to do. When they did a survey in the US for kids and said, what do you want to be? In China, kids said astronaut and engineer. In the US, they said YouTuber. And I'm really sorry to say this, as a YouTuber myself, sorry. That's horrible. You shouldn't want to just be a YouTuber, but they've been educating our kids that becoming gamers and YouTubers and technologists and, I don't know, influencers, booty shakers on Instagram, those are the things that they should be doing. So the education, they got it nailed. Innovation and technology. Is China more innovative and technological, or is the one world government who has all of these initiatives, who, now we are creating literally the systems through crypto, blockchain, tokenization, all of these systems to build the technological future? Is that being done by China? China doesn't even have Bitcoin, okay? Or is that being done by the one world government, who are VCs and money power structures, which I should teach people? So they win. Better education, last 30 years, hit the nail on the head, leading to better innovation in tech. That's why this technology is here to engulf the entire world, because it can't be stopped, because it's so innovative and so much better at working. Okay, let's continue.
Lag, the establishment of the currency as a reserve currency. You can also see that these forces then declined in a similar order, reinforcing each other's decline. Let's now look at the typical sequence of events going on inside a country that produces these rises and declines. In a nutshell, the big cycle typically begins after a major conflict, often a war, establishes the new leading power and the new world order. Because no one wants to challenge this power, a period of peace and prosperity typically follows. As people get used to this peace and prosperity...
Good news. So what you just said, Mr. Ray Dalio, is after the war, after the shift, after the one world government takes over, we shall have peace and prosperity and growth and good times. Wow. I didn't realize that. But yeah, that's what happens. That's where the good times come back and children live in a much better world than existed before.
They increasingly bet on it continuing. They borrow money to do that, which eventually leads to a financial bubble. The empire's share of trade grows, and when most transactions are conducted in its currency, it becomes a reserve currency.
Let me translate. When the share of transactions done in crypto grows, then it becomes the reserve currency.
Which leads to even more borrowing. At the same time, this increased prosperity distributes wealth unevenly, so the wealth gap typically
Notice that? It's weird.
Grows between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. Eventually, the financial bubble bursts, which leads to the printing of money and increased internal conflict.
Down the road, probably like 50, 60 years down the road. crypto will cause another one of these problems. Everything will be run on this decentralized system. People will figure out a way to coerce it or just create new cryptos or something. It'll turn into a lot of debt. People will start fighting between the poor and the rich. You know, the huge.
Between the rich and the poor, which leads to some form of revolution to redistribute wealth. This can happen peacefully or as a civil war. While the empire struggles with this internal conflict, its power diminishes relative to external rival powers on the rise. When a new rising power gets strong enough to compete with the dominant power that is having domestic...
You know what's crazy? I think after the one world government takes over, the next, by the time I die, I think AI is going to be the new power. I'll be really honest. It's the only thing that I see being more stronger than us and eventually taking over. So hopefully hopefully I die one day.
Breakdowns, external conflicts, most typically wars, take place. Out of these internal and external wars come new winners and losers. Then the winners get together to create the new world order, and the cycle begins again. As I looked back, I saw that these cause and effect relationships drove the cycles of rises and declines all the way back to the Roman Empire. I saw how the stories of each one of these cycles blended together with others before, during, and after, in the same way as each individual story blends with others to make the epic 500-year story that is our collective history. And like human life cycles, no two are exactly the same, but most are similar. They're driven by logical cause and effect relationships that progress through stages from birth to strength and maturity to weakness and inevitably decline. However, that's like saying a person's life cycle takes 80 years on average, without recognizing that many are much shorter and many are longer. While age can be a good indicator of future longevity, a better way is to look at health indicators. One can do that with empires and their vital signs too. I found that by watching the indicators of power change, I was able to see what stage a country was in, which helped me to anticipate what was likely to come next. Now, I'll take you through the big cycle in more detail. Give me 20 minutes and I'll give you the last 500 years of history and show you the similar patterns across the Dutch, British, US, and Chinese empires.
So now let's just recap some of the stuff that he just talked about. We talked about the education and innovation part of the growth of the New World Order. Another point he made is competitiveness, okay? I mean, these mega corporations, businesses can't compete with them anymore, right? Nobody can compete with Amazon anymore. Nobody can compete with Google. Nobody can compete with Facebook. They're just taking over. So the competitiveness is going through the roof. And then when you add the metaverse into it, that they're going to create a completely new physical space, a multitude of physical, digital spaces that people will experience and the efficiency of them interacting within those spaces will basically be free compared to them interacting in physical spaces. Physical countries will not be able to compete with that. Technically the biggest nation on earth is Facebook. It has 3 billion members and they can move countries with that, right? Output, like that was one of the things that he said, how much output, economic output is created. Digital models create way more output. That's why digital companies are worth trillions of dollars and physical companies are worth billions of dollars, right? Ford makes cars and it's worth a lot, but Google gives you information and it's worth 100 Fords, right? So the output and the ability for it to impact so many more lives and improve so many more lives with the click of a button makes these digital assets way, way, way more capable of output. And again, they're jurisdictionless. They are not from any country. Trade, like imagine you try to trade gold, physical gold. How slow is that? How costly is that? Imagine you then trade tokenized gold, digital gold. How quick is that? You try to trade stocks. How slow is that? You try to trade something else. How quick? No. Strength. Hackers. Take down whole countries and whole systems. So their military better. They have companies that have genetic modification technology, biotech that can do whatever they want. They have nanotechnology. They have things that if I started talking about it here, I would get canceled yesterday. And you guys already know about it, so I'm not going to go on about it. The financial center, the financial center has been New York for a while, but go to New York now and let me know how financial centrish it feels. The new financial center is digital spaces. The new financial center is Binance. The new financial center was FTX until we were like, that's not a good financial center. But the new financial center are digital spaces and places and digital spaces of interaction where billions of people can interact rather than just a few people. And actually levels the playing field in many ways. Because right now, if you're not in New York, you can't access certain financial benefits. But in the digital spaces, wherever you are, you'll be able to access it. Okay? About as soon as the fracturing is complete in the world's reserve currencies and all of them depend on cryptocurrencies to transact, now most of the value is flowing through cryptocurrencies, which means those cryptocurrencies, which are digital assets, those crypto assets become the de facto global reserve currency. If you had to pick one, that would be that. Now, the global education system has been teaching us about globalization and oneness. Like, kids nowadays, they don't care that you're from America or somewhere else. We're all the same. We've been growing up same. We've been watching each other the same. American English has become the de facto English that a lot of people speak in the world because of Hollywood. So there's a homogenization happening, and the education is teaching us to do that. And within the next 10 years, as the metaverse becomes the most dominant place of interaction and the digital comes into the physical and the physical goes into the digital, it's going to create a space where, thinking of yourself as from a country will become, kind of like how we think about races today. It's like, I'm not Indian. I'm actually Balinese. I'm in Bali. How am I Indian? I was Indian at one point, and then I was American, then I was Canadian. Now I am Balinese, right? So when that digital shift happens, it's going to happen for sure. Now, as we've seen, okay, war happens between now and 2028, okay, according to these timelines and according to everything that's lining up. Between now and 2028 is the war process. It's already happening, just gets crazier and crazier, crescendos, peaks, everybody loses their money, massive riots. We get, things fall apart like Sri Lanka. And then on the other side is peace and prosperity, probably from 2030 to 2050-ish. That's usually the cycle. Between now and 2040, the shift from these reserve currencies happens over to the cryptocurrencies. And by 2040, crypto becomes the global reserve currency de facto by far, and the US dollar goes to zero. That's the longest it would take. It could happen much, much quicker, but these things happen slow, so it could take as long as that. And again, I don't know. I'm just making projections from what's being said. And we're back.
500 years of big cycles. Years of big cycles. I'm going to describe the typical cycle by dividing it into 3 phases: the rise, the top, and the decline. The rise. Successful new orders that rise, both internal and external, are typically started by powerful revolutionary leaders doing 4 things. First, they win power by gaining more support than the opposition. Second,
power by gaining more support than the opposition. The globalists are winning support by convincing us of their green, one world, earth saving agenda, that we have to follow ESG and, all of this stuff. They're also winning support by making crypto the thing that we see as our savior, and that is going to give us freedom. Blockchain is apparently going to give us freedom, just like the net and the web gave us our freedom last time. Logical. These things give us freedom, right? Okay.
They consolidate power by converting, weakening, or eliminating the opposition so they don't stand in their way. Third,
Weakening of the opposition happening by cutting off the US from the world, making people psychology weak and getting them hooked up to dopamine addiction and shortening their attention spans and many other modalities of weakening people, if you know what I'm talking about.
they establish systems and institutions that make the country work well. And fourth,
Establish institutions and organizations that make the country work well. Let's look at the ones that the one world government has already created. They have World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, Bank of International Settlements, International Monetary Fund, NATO, United Nations, and many other organizations that make them run very efficiently compared to countries. Like, countries don't even know what they're doing anymore. Even the European Union is unelected officials that actually run those countries. So, and of course, people are rushing in to help them create faceless automatic organizations called decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, and decentralizing it and taking people out of the picture always, because at that point apparently nobody can control it, but that's not how the world works. And then, lucky for you, we're going to connect it all to AI to even be more fucked.
Fourth, they pick their successors well, or create systems that do that. Because a great empire requires many great leaders over several generations.
They have nailed down, right? So these families that run the world, they're families. They have kids. They leave the world to their kids. Pretty simple system. Trustable system.
At this stage, soon after winning the fight, there is typically a period of peace and growing prosperity because the leadership is clearly dominant and has broad support, so no one wants to fight it. During this phase, leaders within the country have to design an excellent system to raise the country's wealth and power. First and foremost, to be great, they must have strong education.
The strongest education on the planet right now, the internet, YouTube. Yeah, strongest education. Now, let me scare the shit out of you again. Even better education is coming from AI.
Which is not just teaching knowledge and skills, but also strong character, civility, and work ethic. These are typically taught in the family, schools, and religious institutions. That provides a healthy respect for rules and laws, order within society, low corruption, and enables them to unite behind a common purpose.
Okay, so new rules and new laws. Okay, well, they're doing that. The EU is creating new laws. World Health Organization is creating new rules and new laws. The One World Government is creating new rules and new laws. Digital ID is coming. There's QR code passports everybody has to have. There's social credit scores that are coming that are already being implemented in many places. So there's a completely new set of rules that are being implemented on a global scale for everybody to follow, and nobody wants to fight, nobody wants to resist, because they're just too damn strong. Not even countries want to resist because they know how the game works.
Work well together.
What's the common purpose everybody's behind right now? Carbon. Green. We got to save the earth. And I agree. We got to save the earth. Can't disagree with that. You're an asshole if you disagree with that. Carbon. Apparently we just got to reduce carbon. This is something interesting most people don't think about. You're made of carbon. You ever think about which carbon they want to reduce? Just saying.
As they do this, they increasingly shift from producing basic products to innovating and inventing new technologies.
Inventing new technologies. You know what we're talking about. Have you heard of this new technology? It's called blockchain. Here to give you freedom. Tokenization. Metaverse. Artificial intelligence. Stuff you can't understand. Decentralized autonomous organizations run by Byzantine Empire consensus or algorithms that are causing a decentralized transfer of blah blah zero knowledge proof stuff.
For example, the Dutch wrote Habsburg Empire and become superbly educated. They became so inventive that they came up with a quarter of all major inventions in the world, the most important of which was the invention of ships that could travel around the world to collect great riches, and the invention of capitalism, as we know it today, to finance those voyages. They, like all leading empires,
Literally created the asset class called stocks. Wow. I think that did pretty well, right? If you got some stocks when they created the asset class called stocks, he did all right, you know? Ooh, interesting. We just created a new asset class called cryptocurrencies and digital assets. What do you think happens if you participate in that as early, like imagine you got stocks back in whatever, 1800s, where would you be today? Dead, I know. Relax. I mean, like, where would your kids be? Come on, man. Get along with the times. I'm just saying, you know. It's a pretty high likelihood that if we get into this new asset class, which a new asset class has not been invented ever since, you know, we had stocks invented. I guess you could call derivatives an asset class that was invented after stocks, but anyways, it's a new asset class. When a new asset class gets invented, the people who participate get insanely wealthy.
enhance their thinking by being
But most people lose all of their money.
open to the best thinking in the world. As a result, the people in the country become more productive and more competitive in world markets, which shows up in their growing economic output and rising share of world trade. You can see this happening now as the US and China are roughly comparable in both their economic outputs and their shares of world trade. As countries trade more globally, they must protect their trade routes and their foreign interests from attack, so they develop great military strength. If done well, this virtuous cycle leads to strong income growth, which can be used to finance investments in education, infrastructure, and research and development. They must also develop systems to incentivize and empower those that have the ability to make or take wealth.
Incentivize those that have the ability to make or take wealth. I know of a system that has the ability to make or take wealth. It's called digital assets. It's making digital wealth. It's taking wealth from a lot of people who run in like idiots and lose all of their money. But that's why we're, you know, being incentivized, monetarily incentivized to create these systems and build these systems. For me personally, the reason I build them is not the money. It's because I'm like, if I'm not building a system, somebody else is building a system, and I don't want to live with somebody else's system. I'm going to build a system the way that I build a system. At least there's equanimity and fairness as far as I can put it in, and I can see the guts of the thing. So hopefully that creates a better world.
In all of these cases, the most successful empires used a capitalist approach to develop productive entrepreneurs.
By the way, isn't this beautiful? We got like a Bali rainstorm background. Where on YouTube do you see this? All right, everybody's over there with their whatever, fake lighting stuff. We got Bali, bro. We got real rain, beauty, water falling from the sky, water blessing happening. This is a water blessing. This is Bali water blessing happening live for you. Thank you. Thank you for joining.
China, which is run by the Chinese Communist Party, used a form of this capitalist approach. Deng Xiaoping, when asked about this, said, "It doesn't matter if it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it catches mice. And it's glorious to be rich."
What a great quote. He's a communist, but he's like, look, it's glorious to be rich. All right? And I don't disagree. If you figure out ways to add value to people's lives and you improve people's lives, the systems change. We always like to hold on to the old system because we think it's way better than the new system, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, the system's going to change no matter what. You either change along with the system and figure out a new way to add value to people's lives and then, get gloriously rich, or you stay hanging on to the old system and go down with it. Either way, ideologically, stick true to what it is that you believe. I'm going with the first option.
Their capital markets. Most importantly, their lending, bond, and stock markets. That allows people to convert their savings into investments to fund invention and development and share in the successes of those who make great things happen. The Dutch created the first publicly listed company, the Dutch East India Company, and the first stock market to fund it, which were integral parts of the system that produced massive wealth and power. As a natural consequence, the greatest empires developed the world's leading financial centers for attracting and distributing the world's capital. Amsterdam was the world's financial center when the Dutch were preeminent. London, when the British were on top. New York is now. And China is quickly developing its financial centers. Most importantly, the capitalists, the governments, and the military must work together. Not only
Mr. Radio, did you just say the capitalist governments and the military must work together? Is this a thing? Is this how the world works? Yes, it is how the world works. And in this process, that's what always happens. They all work together to run the world because they're all funded by the same people, right? It's a fact. It's not a coincidence right now that, the money goes from the U.S. government to Ukraine, and it's inside of a lend-lease agreement where, billions of dollars goes to Ukraine. Ukraine then apparently put billions of dollars into FTX. That's probably nothing. And then they take that money and then they basically buy U.S. weapons with it and go into debt and are loaned those weapons, so they owe the money back. They owe more money back to the U.S. for getting money from the U.S. Yeah, that, my lovelies, is how the game works.
together, they were one and the same. The Dutch East India Company was granted a trade monopoly from the government and had its own officially sanctioned military to go out into the global markets to make and take wealth. The British followed with the British East India Company and had a similar coordination of their government, business, and military operations. The U.S. military-industrial complex followed suit, as does the Chinese system today. As the country becomes the largest international trading empire, its transactions can be paid with its currency, making it the preferred global medium of exchange. And because their currency is so widely accepted and frequently used, people around the world want to save in it, making it the preferred storehold of wealth, and thus the world's leading reserve currency.
Interesting this guy's saying storehold of wealth, It's almost like he's talking about Bitcoin. People want to save in it, so it's a storehold of wealth. But, no, that's probably a conspiracy theory.
The guilder was the world's main reserve currency when the Dutch led world trade. The pound was when the British led, and the dollar has been since the US led. Naturally, China's currency is increasingly being used as a reserve currency. Having a reserve currency enables the empire
So
to...
this is interesting. He just said China's currency is being used as a reserve currency, but it isn't, is it? They're going to make another reserve currency with all the other countries. So then China is not the dominant power, right? Otherwise, the yuan would become the global reserve currency. Okay, doesn't line up, does it?
than other countries. That advantage is huge. Think about it. People all over the world are eager to save and hence lend back their currency to the empire. Countries without a reserve currency don't have that. And when the empire runs out of its own money, remember the United States in 1971? They can always print more. The exorbitant privilege afforded by the empire's reserve currency leads borrowing to increase and the beginning of a financial bubble. This series of cause and effect relationships leading to mutually supportive financial, political, and military powers, bolstered by the borrowing power of a reserve currency, have gone together since history began to be recorded. All the empires that became the most powerful in the world followed this path to the top. While in the top phase, most of these strengths are sustained, embedded within the fruits of their success are the seeds of their decline. As a rule, as people in these rich and powerful countries earn more, that makes them more expensive and less competitive relative to people in other countries who are willing to work for less. At the same time, people in other countries naturally copy the methods and technologies of the leading power, which further reduces the leading power's competitiveness. For example, British shipbuilders had less expensive workers than Dutch shipbuilders. So they hired Dutch designers to design better ships that were built by less expensive British workers, making them more competitive, which led the British to rise and the Dutch to decline. Also, as people become richer, they tend not to work as hard. They enjoy more leisure, pursue the finer and less productive things in life, and at the extreme become decadent.
I want to go to Thailand. I want smoothie bowls. Let's go for a smoothie bowl. And then after that, I just want to chill. I want to become an influencer. I don't want to lift things. I want people to work for me. That's us. That's us. Eating, drinking, lounging, lazy, expensive. And he's saying those are the ones who die.
Values change from generation to generation during the rise to the top, from those who had to fight to achieve wealth and power to those who inherited it. They're less battle-hardened, steeped in luxuries, and accustomed to the easy life.
That's us. With like top hats, and we like going to parties, and we're like doing all that stuff, including me. Okay? We've become soft in this world. Good times make weak men. Weak men make hard times. Hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. We are in the times, we're in good times, which means it's making weak men and weak women. And it's a fact.
Which makes them more vulnerable to challenges. The golden era of the Dutch Empire and the Victorian era of the British Empire were such high prosperity periods like this. As people get used to doing well, they increasingly bet on the good times continuing and borrow money to do that, which grows into financial bubbles. Naturally, the financial gains come unevenly, so the wealth gap grows. Wealth gaps are self-reinforcing because rich people use their greater resources to reinforce their powers. For example, they give greater privileges to their children, like better education, and they influence the political system to their advantage. This causes the gaps in values, politics, and opportunities to grow between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. Those who are less well off feel the system is unfair, so resentments grow. But as long as the living standards of most people are still rising, these gaps and resentments don't boil over into conflict.
So most people are not rising anymore, are they? When food gets more expensive, and water gets more expensive, and education gets more expensive, and oil gets more expensive, and cars and houses and beds and sleep and rest, everything gets more expensive, then the quality of living starts to diminish. And that's what we're watching in the entire world today. Many countries have just completely melted down because their quality of, they're financially broke, and their quality of living went to basically shit. Like it's a horrible thing to see.
Having the world's reserve currency inevitably leads to borrowing excessively and contributes to the country building up large debts with foreign lenders. While this boosts spending power over the short term, it weakens the country's financial health and weakens the currency over the long term. In other words, when borrowing and spending are strong, the empire appears very strong. But its finances are in fact being weakened. The borrowing sustains the country's power beyond its fundamentals by financing both domestic overconsumption and international military conflicts required to maintain the empire. Inevitably, the cost of maintaining and defending the empire becomes greater than the revenue it brings in, so having an empire becomes unprofitable. For example, the Dutch Empire overextended around the world and fought war after increasingly expensive war with the British and other European powers to protect its territory and trade routes. The British Empire similarly became massive, bureaucratic, and lost its competitive advantages as rival powers, particularly Germany, soared, leading to an increasingly expensive arms race and world war. The U.S. has spent about $8 trillion on foreign wars and their consequences since September 11, and trillions more for other military operations and for supporting military bases in 70 countries. And it still isn't spending enough to support its military competition with China in the area around China. In this cycle, the richer countries eventually get deeper into debt by borrowing from poorer countries that save more. It's one of the early signs of a wealth and power shift. This started in the United States in the 1980s, when it had a per capita income 40 times that of China's, and started borrowing from Chinese who wanted to save in dollars because the dollar was the world's reserve currency. Similarly, the British borrowed a lot of money from its much poorer colonies, and the Dutch did the same at their top. If the empire begins to run out of new lenders, those holding their currency begin to look to sell and get out rather than to buy, save, lend, and get in.
This is what we're seeing happen now. Countries are dumping the US dollar bonds like crazy because they're saying, we think the US is broke and we don't have faith in it anymore. We're going to give you the bond, give us back the cash because we're going to use it to go buy assets with it. So countries are losing faith in the US dollar bonds, and when the bond market melts down, it is the over for the entire world.
And the strength of the empire begins to decline. The decline. The decline comes from internal economic weakness together with internal fighting or costly external fighting, or both.
Check.
Typically, the decline comes gradually and then very suddenly.
Gradually and then very suddenly. We've seen the decline happening from 2008 until now, if you didn't fully notice. But it's time for the suddenly part. Between now and, latest by, I guess, 2028, according to this analysis, we are going to see some fireworks.
When debts become very large and there is an economic downturn, and the empire can no longer borrow the money necessary to repay its debts, the financial bubble bursts. This creates great domestic hardships and forces the country to choose between defaulting on its debts or printing a lot of new money. It always chooses to print a lot of new money, at first gradually and eventually massively.
We are at the massively stage where there's going to be a default of a sort where they take everybody's money from the banks, but the only choice is to print a ton of money and pump it into the system. That means the only choice is to pump up these digital assets to numbers that won't even make sense for most people.
That devalues the currency and raises inflation. For the Dutch, this was the financial crisis brought about by financial excesses and paying for the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War. Similarly, for the British, it was paying for its financial excesses and its debts from the two world wars. And for the U.S., it's been 3 cycles of debt finance booms and busts since the 90s, with the central bank stepping in each time with stronger measures. When the government has problems funding itself, when there are bad economic conditions, and living standards for most people are declining, and there are large wealth, values, and political gaps, internal conflict between the rich and the poor, as well as different ethnic, religious, and racial groups, greatly increases. This leads to political extremism that shows up as populism of the left or the right. Those of the left seek to redistribute the wealth, while those of the right seek to maintain the wealth in the hands of the rich. Typically, during such times, taxes on the rich rise, and when the rich fear their wealth and well-being will be taken away, they move to places, assets, and currencies they feel safer in. These outflows reduce the empire's tax revenue, which leads to a classic, self-reinforcing, hollowing out process. When the flight of wealth gets bad enough, governments outlaw it.
Governments outlaw it, almost like stopping people from transferring their money out of banks using the SWIFT system to crypto. Just saying. The SWIFT system is the way to get your money out of the country. The SWIFT system is the way to get your money into crypto. Both are outlawed today.
Those seeking to get out begin to panic. These turbulent conditions undermine productivity, which shrinks the economic pie and causes more conflict about how to divide the shrinking resources. Populist leaders emerge from both sides and pledge to take control and bring about order. That's when democracy is most challenged because it fails to control the anarchy, and it is when the move to a strong populist leader who will bring order to the chaos is most likely. As conflict within the country escalates, it leads to some form of revolution or civil war to redistribute wealth and force the necessary big changes. This can be peaceful and maintain the existing order, but it's more often violent and changes the order. For example, the Roosevelt Revolution to redistribute wealth was relatively peaceful and maintained the existing internal order, while the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the Chinese Revolution were much more violent and led to new internal orders. This internal conflict makes the empire weak and vulnerable to rising external rivals who, seeing this domestic weakness, are more inclined to mount a challenge. This raises the risk of great international conflict, especially if the rival has built up a comparable military. Defending oneself and one's empire against rivals requires great military spending, which has to occur as domestic economic conditions are deteriorating and the empire can least afford it. Since there is no viable system for peacefully adjudicating international disputes, these conflicts are typically resolved through tests of power. As bolder challenges are made, the leading empire is faced with the difficult choice of fighting or retreating. Fighting and losing is the worst outcome, but retreating is bad too. as it cedes progress to the rival and signals that the empire is weak to those countries that are considering which side to be on. Poor economic conditions.
Look, at this point, most countries have already sided with BRICS. A lot of the countries. The other countries, they're still hanging out with the U.S., but there's the divide in the world, and you can tell which countries you're in and which side you're on. So, play that game.
For wealth and power, which inevitably leads to some kind of war. Wars are terribly costly. At the same time, they produce the tectonic shifts that realign the new orders to the new realities of wealth and power in the world. When those holding the reserve currency and debt of the declining empire lose faith and sell them, that marks the end of its big cycle. Of the roughly 750 currencies that existed since 1700, less than 20% now exist, and all of them have been devalued. For the Dutch, this happened after their defeat in the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, when they weren't able to repay the massive debts they built up during it. This led to a run on the Bank of Amsterdam, and a
Dutch couldn't repay, and it led to a run on the banks of Amsterdam, and the currency went to zero. Okay, tell me more.
Desperate sell-off, forcing massive money printing,
Tell me more.
which devalued the currency and the empire into irrelevance. For the British, this happened after World War II, when despite their victory, they could not repay the massive debts they borrowed to fund their war effort. This led to a series of money printing, devaluations, and sell-offs in the British pound.
The British pound couldn't pay back their debts. They defaulted. Their currency got devalued, and there was bank runs where people lost all their money. Okay.
As the US and the dollar emerged dominant and created a new world order. At the time of this recording, the United States hasn't yet reached this point. While it has massive debt, spends more than it earns, and funds this deficit with more borrowing and printing huge amounts of new money, the big sell-off in dollars and dollar debt hasn't yet begun.
This was recorded in 10 months ago. Well, Ray Dalio, I would like to give you an update, my friend. Now this process has started. The bond sell-off has already begun in a massive, massive way. The faith is being lost. Oh, what a difference 10 months make, don't they? So yeah, this has already begun. The US is already on the way out. That's why we're watching the bond market so closely, right? Because the bond market is the debt market. Now the Federal Reserve has gone into emergency mode where they're just buying the bonds back just to keep things alive. The bond collapse is what destroyed the pound in the last 10 months. It's what messed up the euro. It's what destroyed the Japanese yen. It's what's going to make all of these countries go bankrupt. That whole process has started in a massive, massive way on a country scale and an institutional scale. So we are in the end game.
And while there are great internal and external conflicts occurring for all the classic reasons, they've not yet crossed the line to become wars. Eventually, out of these conflicts, whether they're violent or not, come new winners who get together and restructure the losers' debts and political systems.
It's been going for a while, and the war with China is going to start, and there's more wars coming. Once cyber war starts, it is over.
Establish the new world order. Then the old cycle and empire ends, and the new one begins, and they do it all over again. That's a lot of detail I just threw at you to paint a picture of how the typical big cycle transpires. Of course, not all of them transpire in exactly this way, but most largely do. So much so that it seems like the stories of rises and declines stay essentially the same, and the only things that change are the clothes the characters wear and the technologies they use. So, where are we heading? The future. Most empires have their time in the sun and inevitably decline. Reversing a decline is difficult because that requires undoing a lot that's already been done, but it's possible. By looking at these indicators, it's pretty easy to see which stage of the big cycle an empire is in, how fit it is, and whether its condition is improving or worsening, which can help one estimate how many years it has left. Still, these estimates aren't precise, and the cycle can be extended if those in charge pay attention to their vital signs and improve them. For example, knowing that a person is 60 years old, how fit they are, whether they smoke or not, and a few other basic vital signs, one can estimate the person's longevity. One can do that with empires and their vital signs too. It won't be precise, but it will be broadly indicative and give clear direction on steps to take to increase longevity. It's most often the case that a nation's greatest war is with itself over whether or not it can make the hard decisions needed to sustain success.
A nation's greatest war is with itself. And if they can make the decisions, hard decisions needed for success. China is making the hard decisions of figuring out how to optimize the food security of its country. Indonesia is securing its natural resources in a way to be able to protect itself in all cases. India is securing its resources to be able to keep production within the country itself. Saudi Arabia is realigning itself and the oil hegemony that's existed in a way to protect against things. Ukrainians are fighting for their lives. The Sri Lankans are figuring out how to reboot the economy. The Americans are worried about which pronoun to use. So I don't think the hard decisions are going to be made. The way you hollow out the old world order is you create an app called TikTok. In China, you show engineering and astronauts. And in America, you show stupid dances and challenges where kids choke themselves to death, literally hold their breath until they pass out, and then some of them die. Okay? The strength of the process that's going on right now, the wars that are going on right now, is so much that this like repairing stuff is not going to work. The decline is as good as in the bag. We just now have to ride out through the process to the other side.
As for what we need to do, it comes down to just two things: earn more than we spend and treat each other well.
Said it. Earn more than we spend and treat each other well. I say it. Create more revenue streams and be good and be the best version of yourself and help people and support people and all this stuff.
Strong education, inventiveness, being competitive, and all the rest are just ways of getting at these two things. It's easy to measure if we're doing them. So like people who want to get fit, let's get on the program and improve our vitals. Let's
do some fucking fat. I'm sorry. I had to. Time to get on the treadmill, America. Time to go jogging.
Let's do that individually and collectively. My goal for sharing this picture of how the world works and a few principles for dealing with it well is to help you recognize where we are and the challenges we face, and to make the wise decisions needed to navigate these times well. Since there is a lot more to discuss and we are out of time, you can learn more in my book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. And
this is a life-changing book. Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order shed more light for me on what the future is going to look like and defined it than anything else that I've ever studied. This and Fourth Turning are the two books that define my projective thinking going forward, alongside with everything else that I've learned. Now, you've understood all of this stuff. In this collapse period, in this death of the old world order, one of the biggest things that people miss is that it's the destabilization of the stability of the old system. So let's really look at what is the stability of the old system. You could fly anywhere. Food is delivered from the other side of the planet to you. Goods and services are delivered. Energy reaches you at all times. Electricity is running. Internet is running. You can run your businesses. All of these things were functioning. That's the stability of the old system that exists. You are watching now, anybody who has a business that relies on the supply chain is dying or already dead. But I'm literally watching them. I work with a lot of people that have, 9-figure businesses, 10-figure businesses that are dying because they're hooked into the supply chains. The cost of everything is going through the roof. So in this process of the shift, of the turbulence that happens, you have to create more revenue streams. You have to take self-custody of your wealth and turn it into assets and custody it yourself. For me, that's digital assets. You have to start thinking in the future, in the way the future is going to be, in an AI, metaverse, digitized, social credit future, fully controlled, no privacy type future. And you have to align yourself with that rather than be backwards looking at all times. You have to get your own food security and water security. You have to stop depending on the grocery store to be full, because one day it's not. And we've gone through this multiple times now. So if you don't have these things in place, you have to have a community around you of people who you can rely on and trust, that have skills, that are resourceful. It's not about the resources, it's about the resourcefulness. You have to basically create a self-reliance on yourself and have the right people around you who are also self-reliant and capable of creating the kind of world that you want. You have to do these things. So if you're somebody who's like, I'm too old, I'm too tired, sorry, then you're one of the people who's going to get caught up in this whole process. If you're listening to this and you've been listening for a while, you're luckily one of the people, lucky for me that you are one of the people that actually cares enough to do something about it. And I really, really, really appreciate it. I genuinely wake up every single day knowing that almost every single person that I speak to in my day has taken control of their own destiny, has taken control of their own lives. And a lot of it came out of the message that I've been speaking. That's why it feels so good to speak it. But a lot of it came out of their own understanding of which way the world is going. Because please don't just listen to my message. Listen to Ray Dalio's message. Listen to 1,000 different experts that are teaching this. And we do a market analysis showing you those experts that I like to follow myself. But, just knowing that we are creating this change in the middle of this chaos, we're creating a more beautiful world. And on the other side, when those times of peace and prosperity come, we will be the ones who prosper. And even during these times of turbulence, we will still thrive. We will still prosper. Even through the worst times, we will smile knowing that we created an internal state that allowed us to do that. Okay? So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you just for being you. If you're here listening to this in the middle of a bear market, you're the right mindset to really make it through the shit show. Because most of the people that don't have the right nervous system to handle it, when we get to these points, they just give up, they freak out, they run away, blah, blah, blah. If you think this crypto market is bad, wait until things change, my loves. Wait until you see the kind of shit show that's already playing out. In Bali here, we're in a bit of a bubble, but in the rest of the world, you know how it's going. So just stay strong, keep on keeping on, and keep on the path that you're on. So we're going to close off on questions. Do we have any poignant questions from our friends on the tubes of you?
All questions being answered.
Nailed it. All right. So yeah, if you're listening this far, you're a legend. Please subscribe somewhere like here or here. One of these sides, there's a button right here, somewhere here. There's a subscribe button. And then hit the like button if you like me. Even if you don't like me, hit the dislike button and tell me why I'm an asshole, and tell me which one of my jokes you didn't like, so I can make more of those jokes. I'm just kidding. I'll make more of those jokes because they're funny. Come on, loosen up. And we got a lot of funny shit coming up. We got a lot of funny shit coming up. Because in this time, in these kind of times, comedians become the kings, and it's such a necessary thing. So we're creating a whole separate section and whole different channel called Crypto on Acid, which is gonna hopefully make you laugh your ass off. It'll be posted here. We'll blast it everywhere. And yeah, come along, laugh with us, and tell us all the stuff that pisses you off there. I'm just kidding. Anyway, if you're watching this, you're a good person. I love you. Tell us more jokes. Tell us funnier shit to say. Give us ideas. Hang out with us. Come to Bali. We'll go to the farm. Until then, I love you. It's nighttime. I gotta go. And see you guys next time.